This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borodero-Renee. The two of us are architects, partners at the office, and of course, hosts of the show. And today our guest is Dan Rubinstein. Dan is the host and creator of the Grand Tourist podcast. And with Dan, we discuss his career in journalism, changes in media production, the future of journalism and media, our shift to the personality economy, and of course, the Grand Tourist. Hope you guys enjoy it. This was a fun one. Sponsors.
Would you like to get Asbirds faster?
Yes.
Okay. IPX has you covered. IPX lets you seamlessly transform laser scans into LOD 300 BIM and CAD files. Whether you've got your 3D scans already or need the full laser scanning service, IPX offers instant pricing and order tracking for scan-to-BIM services on any project, no matter the size or complexity. Once a building scan is complete, IPX delivers detailed BIM, CAD, 360 virtual tours, and material takeoffs in their platform, where you can view, share, export, query, and quantify areas, floors, and materials. Check out the IPX link in our show notes. Managing design projects and specifications can be challenging, but Programma makes it effortless. Trusted by top interior design firms in over 75 countries, it's the world's most elegant software for interior designers. With its suite of powerful tools, you will experience smoother client interactions with less back and forth, saving you hours of admin work and making your job more enjoyable. Stop struggling and start thriving with the seriously powerful Programma. Click the link in our show notes and get 25% off an annual subscription with code SECONDSTUDIO at checkout. You will wonder how you ever worked without it.
This is the Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Dan. Here we go.
I'm from Long Island, New York. A sub, for those who don't know New York, it's a suburb. But I think to me, that has shaped my personality more than anything else. And the way that I view life in New York too is New York has always been sort of like this shining city on a hill, right? That you kind of work your entire childhood to get away from. Of course, it's very easy for me to go home and visit family. There are some people in design who are kind of in the same sort of, I guess, cultural circle as I am. And when we find out that the other person is from Long Island, we all give each other a knowing look, like I don't know, like we both survived the same war or something. Like we both kind of go like, yeah, you made it, you survived too. Oh, okay, I see you. There's some people. Yeah, like Athena Calderon is from Long Island, and there are other guests I've had on the podcast that are, I would say secret Long Islanders. I don't have a very harrowing childhood or anything like that, anything. Even if I was just from the 5 boroughs of New York, I think I could. It's much more interesting than just to be like, I lived up in a suburb, very boring, very safe, middle class, dead end street with a nice lawn and all that stuff. So,
right,
Island for sure.
Right. So that's kind of funny.
You just described David's childhood.
Yeah. It sounds like what I had in Orange County. Actually, to be honest.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's that sort of middle, for people that don't know New York and Long Island. It's that middle suburb part you drive through to go from New York City to the Hamptons.
Right.
Past JFK, but about an hour and a half before you hit West Hampton. So, that's the place that I'm from.
So when you were a kid growing up in that setting, was there anything about that place or your childhood that was a precursor to what you're doing now? Anything that would say you're going to go into design?
No, not at all. And I think that's
really
because I've interviewed now with the Grand Tourist, I've done over 125 episodes. And obviously in my career, I've probably interviewed thousands of designers. And so many people have that sort of origin story of, I grew up, I was raised in Brazil, but my parents were from Paris, and I went to school in Los Angeles. And as a child, I would flip through the pages of Vogue magazine and one day dream that I would become the person that I am. Like, no, I had a really, both my parents worked, had a very safe and boring childhood. I played Nintendo. I collected comic books. I was a total high school geek. I didn't, I had some exposure to New York culture and to museums and things like that, but most of the culture that I was exposed to came through my mother and my mother's family. That my mom moved to this country when she was a teenager. And so growing up around like a multilingual household with the sort of traditions and the way of carrying yourself and the food and the niceties and all that stuff mixed with, my dad and my dad's side of the family who's more American and more from the tri-state area, as you could say. That probably shaped me more to prepare me for a life and doing what I'm doing. There is I like telling the story. I told the story to my mom has passed now, but I told the story to my mom and she was very, very pleased to hear it. I once had a dinner where I sat next to, I guess you could say like a AAA platinum design royalty of family from another country, let's say. And, I'd known this person for a long time. We'd have a long dinner and we're surrounded by other journalists and other kind of American types. And she just kind of was like, Dan, what are you from? And I was like, New York, Long Island. She's like, no. Where are your family from? And I was like, oh, well, my mom, was born in Switzerland during the war and family lived in Italy for a while. And then she moved to South America and then eventually to New York. And she's like, okay. She's like, don't take this the wrong way. You don't carry yourself like an American, which I kind of took as a slight insult to America, being the patriot that I am. But I think that kind of worldview and just sort of mindset, I think, was the greatest gift that my mom and my family gave me, was just this indescribable quality that I don't even quite know how to put my finger on it. But sadly, even though I grew up in a household that spoke 5 languages, I speak only one, like my dad does. And my mom, was at that generation of immigrants that really wanted to assimilate and really make sure, lose her accent and everything. And I'm like, oh God, couldn't you just have taught me Italian? Like so many other people in my family of my generation speak some Italian and grew up listening to it. And of everyone in the family, I'm the one that needs it the most. So wouldn't it have been nice to just kind of like, if I could just roll up to a meeting in Milan and whip out some basic Italian that would be, beyond your sort of Starbucks level Italian that I think most of us have.
You get it.
Starbucks.
Yeah. Like I'm not going. That's as far as I go. And so yes, that sort of multilingual vibe, but without any of the actual usable elements of it, is a double-edged sword, I guess you could say.
Well, if you look the part and you have the stature of someone who walks the part, then it counts for something, I suppose.
Yeah.
Did you ever try to learn?
Sorry.
Did you ever try to learn Italian or any other language?
I would totally try the Duolingo thing, and and it really, I can read some. I can read a menu. Like I know a lot of vocabulary. I've been to Italy 30 times in my life. So, but I will say, especially in the world of travel, the utility of language has changed. Nowadays, it used to be if you went to a place like Milan or Paris or certain other cities, you really just couldn't get around. Like no one would even, no one would speak English. So you would have to learn. Now, because of the EU and because of just the way the world has worked out, everyone speaks English as a second language. You would really have to find someone over the age of like 75 who would just be completely have non-existent English. So especially if you're a tourist and you're working in the world of like business or fashion or design, or you're going to a hotel or a restaurant, everybody speaks some basic level of something. And now we have, Google Translate and all that stuff, which is only going to get better until finally our phones, what do they call it now? It's called it's like Gibber Talk or something. I don't know if everyone's seen that viral video of like 2 AI assistants talking to one another.
Oh, yes.
They realize that they're both AI, and then they kind of get into like it sounds like something from Star Wars, where they're just like, can we please just
Yeah.
switch to a non-human form of communication? And then they start booping and beeping next to each other.
Yeah.
And I got like
Yeah.
wondering if that's the future. I'll
Oh, God.
so that I'll walk in and my computer will just gibber talk to like the reservation robot at some Italian restaurant, and then the food,
Yeah.
they'll know what to order for me because they know my personality so well, and then like they'll bring me something. But yeah, no, I've tried.
Yeah.
I've tried, and it's definitely on my bucket list of like, everyone's. I did an episode of The Grand Tourist once about buying real estate in Italy, and it made me think like one day I'll just do like an immersion course and do the €1 house scheme and all that stuff, and hope that I pick up something.
It's tough. I think unless you're surrounded by it, it would just fade away. I mean, you've been here, Miranda, for how many years now, and
15.
your French it feels like sometimes it's dwindling despite you.
Oh,
Despite
it
that being
is.
your
Oh,
name.
it is. No,
Yeah.
I call my parents every week, and my dad makes fun of me because I always invent words that don't exist in French. And I'm always like, well, you can only blame me if you are speaking two languages, because it gets a little bit confusing sometimes.
So you're a kid playing Nintendo.
Yeah.
Did you decide in high school, like every other American kid, like what to study and in college, and then pursue a path? Make a lifelong decision at the age of 16.
No. I knew I had to go to college. I knew I wanted to get out of the house immediately. I really wanted to work right away. I wanted to work in TV and film. And so I looked for universities that I could A, afford, B, get into, and C, had some sort of media department. I didn't really know what I wanted to do exactly, but as a fallback, I got into the business school at the university that I went to, the State University of New York at Buffalo. And I was such a great place for me to go to because it's a huge school of 35,000 students. It's a major city of 1 million people. Buffalo kind of has junior versions of everything. Like, it's a major TV market. There are TV stations. There's museums. There's architecture. There's, it's a kind of there's sports teams. Like it's a great place to go to school because you can get a lot of experience and exposure. There's also great gay bars too, which of course I didn't realize at the time. For being a major city near the Canadian border and all of that stuff. And so I started interning really young. I was my first internship was for, and I would come home for the summer, and then I would work in New York City, full time. And I didn't have any summers as a kid in college. So my first internship, I was 18. I worked at the Sally Jesse Raphael talk show. You guys might be too young to remember, but it was a major syndicated daytime talk show that I was like an intern for 5 days a week. And that I would say was like a super formative experience, learning kind of the basics of journalism without realizing it. And one of my favorite memories of working at Sally was one day a week. I was on a rotating schedule, and I was one of the few interns that was there 5 days a week. And there was one of your duties was called cart. I don't know why it was called cart, but basically you went into a windowless closet, like a room that was a closet, which just had a bench, like a desk, and 2 chairs, and a crumpled up old issue of Cosmopolitan magazine. And there were 2 old-fashioned phones. Kids will know them as landlines. You had with like a rows of like little blinking lights of all the different extensions that the phone line had. And because Sally Jesse Raphael was a syndicated show, it was always airing in a different part of the country at a different time. So, and during commercial breaks, wherever it aired, there would be this sort of title card on the screen that would pose a question with a phone number. And it was always something really crazy to elicit a response. And it was one that kept getting used was, is your teenage daughter out of control? Call this number.
Sure.
Or like, have you ever dealt with, murder in your family? Call this number now. And so that number fed to that little windowless, it's a closet, and you and another intern would be stuck there together. And the phones, when the thing would go off, the phones would just light up like a Christmas tree. And you would have to pick up the phone and you would say, Sally Jose Raphael, tell me your story. And you would get a photocopied piece of paper and you had a pen, no computer. Because this is 1995, 96 maybe. And you would basically ask them for their name and number, another name and number of like someone down the street or their grandmother or something. It was like a backup way of getting in touch because no one had email. And then you would be like, what's your story? And they would just tell you some insane story. And that phone number was essentially like a beacon for all of the craziest people in America. And then you would write them down, you would listen to their story, you would try to ask questions so that you got it right. Then, kind of like a Dickensian novel, you would take your batch of goods, and you at the end of the day, where you're bleary-eyed because you've been sitting in a closet for 8 hours talking to the world's craziest people, you would walk to the producer, walk over and be like, hello, ma'am, it's me, the intern. You don't know you don't know my name. Here's my catch of the day. And then she'd like sit there and she would like lick her finger and then like turn the page with, and she'd be like, no, this one, son became a Nazi. No, this one, oh, ran over 3 people. Love this one. She put this aside. And then she'd have like whatever she didn't like, she threw away. Whatever she wanted, she would keep, and she'd just open a drawer and put it in the drawer for later. And she'd be like, you did good, kid. And then you'd be like, thanks, ma'am. And then you would like slowly like walk out backwards like, you were a nervous underling. And that was like the job. But like the ability to sort of pick up the phone and interact with the total stranger, become their friend in a sense, earn their trust in 30 seconds, get them to tell you stuff, was like a huge formative experience. And then from there, I was an intern at like ABC News and covered technology, and technology led to a job in tech. And I worked at an early .com 1.0 huge startup that went from 50 people to 300 people in a year. Real sort of boom time craziness. But at that point I had come to New York and I had settled in and was more interested in art and design and fashion, and like every young kid. And I wanted to work in print, and I made steps towards doing that. I worked at a small sort of seasonal magazine for the Hamptons that no longer exists. And that sort of gave me a taste for print. And then from there, I got a call from a friend of a friend saying, hey, are you still looking for a job? Because the design editor at House Garden magazine at Condé Nast is looking for an assistant. Do you know anything about design? And I said, yeah, I love design. Even though it was a total lie. I had no idea what he was even talking about. And like less than a week later, I was working for Mayor Russ, who was the design editor at House and Garden. And he's still very much in the industry today, and he's the West Coast editor of AD, and still in touch with him more than 20 years later. And I worked for Mayor Russ for 3 years and had like an incredible introduction to the world of luxury and home and storytelling and print. House and Garden at the time was such an expertly put together magazine in a way that would never be done today in such an old-fashioned it was all the quality of Devil Wears Prada without a lot of the attitude. But it was, and evilness. Everyone was quite nice, actually. But it was my introduction to the world of design.
So what was about the publication then that couldn't be done today?
Everything. As anyone from media would list, everything, like staff, office space, budget, and everything that comes with it, right? Like, I use this example, just to show the level of care that went into everything. So if we did a page of like, purple is big right now, we would never just get images from a company and put them on a page and then kind of call it a day. We would literally call in $50,000 worth of purple things, photograph them and transport them to a studio, photograph them, do all the silhouetting, like cutting them out ourselves, making sure that on the layout that we had a Pantone chip for each type of purple that we could then send to the printer to match the shade of purple. So
Wow.
to get that everything was accurate, so that if a reader bought a purple vase, that it was as accurate as possible to the other purples on the page by comparison. That level of care would never be done today. I worked on a story of, and it was just also like people traveled. They went, all the editors went places and wrote. We had our managing editor was literally just a travel agent. Our assistant managing editor. She just was, at any time she was like, I'd be like, where is the food editor? And she'd be like, okay, according to my records, on paper in like these giant binders, she's like, she is on a car somewhere between Nice and Paris right now. She will be at this hotel tonight, and I can call the maitre d' and make sure that she gets the package in time. It was like that kind of, it was a full-on operation. The most talented people would work an entire month for one amazing feature. That kind of money spent, and the talent and the people in the same room and everything, that's just beyond the realm of possibility today.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's fun. But, as an assistant, it is still a little bit Devil Wears Prada. Like, it was very much like, if you screw up, you're out of here. It was very, it was very high stress. You really had to mind your P's and Q's. People used to call Condé Nast sort of like the finishing school for girls and boys, mostly girls, as like a place for you to learn who's important, who's not important, how do you dress, how do you act, how do you act around people who are greater than you on the social cultural ladder. Like, it was very that was definitely a big part of Condé Nast culture that maybe not as strong today, but it's still there. And I definitely can remember times where I accidentally, said things that I probably shouldn't have out loud, and someone like looked at me like very much in that the classic scene from The Devil Wears Prada, talking about shades of blue and how they're all the same. Like, it was kind of the same. I had definitely had moments like that, for sure.
Going back at the story. Oh, so I want to ask you, so when you were locked into that room, you said it was for 8 hours a day, and like the calls were only 30 some odd seconds?
No, the call could take 10 minutes if you were talking to a true crazy person. Like, imagine, I'm not kidding. Who is at home during the day, sees a number like, is your daughter a Nazi? Call this number now. And then you would have to forcibly talk to that person, get their story, and write down an accurate timeline version of it on a single piece of paper. It was just, it's like that's the level of, like, you're not talking to professionals. Like, you're talking to totally random people who just was like, yeah, I'm going to call that number and I'm going to like share my story because someone's got to hear my crazy story. And it was, the crazier, the better. So and sometimes the stories would just be kind of like random and not interesting, but like the juicier that it got, the more, then they would call these people, they'd fly them in, give them clothing to wear for the day. That's why if you ever look at some talk shows and you see people who kind of sound like, they would dress a certain way and they look like all their clothes were just purchased that morning, it's because they were purchased that morning and the tags are still on, and then they will get rid of them. Like, they will return them. An intern will return them. No kidding. Yeah. Like, and then you'll see like promotional consideration is provided by like the Gap or whatever. That was like a trade deal that they had, that these talk shows have with like the Gap or Old Navy or whatever it is. A big part of the job was like steaming clothes, folding them, and returning them back to the Gap or whatever it was. Just one of the many things that makes a TV talk show run.
That's fascinating. Yeah. That's fascinating. It does sound actually like good training to be locked in the situation. Totally. And doing that over and over and over again.
Totally. I had a similar job when I was an intern at an NBC affiliate in Buffalo, and you had to make beat calls. So the beat calls would be, you'd sit in the TV studio and you'd have a phone list of every police station, fire station, like ranger station within 100 miles. And you would just call and be like, hey, it's Dan from NBC. Like, what's going on? And they would be like, nothing. And you'd be like, okay. And then every time one time I called and I was like, hey, anything going on? They're like, yeah, did you hear about the plane crash? And I was like, plane crash? What plane crash? And they were like, there's a small plane that just crashed on the highway 10 minutes ago. And then I would be like, hold on. And then I would get the producer, and then she would like rip the phone. She would like rip the paper out of my hand and like run over to the desk. And it was very exciting to be like, it like very much like the movie Stand By Me. It was very much like, hey, want to see a dead body? Get in the van. We're getting the crew. We're gonna drive at top speed to be the first people to see some horrible accident. It was very that news bug. Even though what I do now is not that. You still very far from that. Now it's like you want to run over and see a new sofa, but there's still this kind of like addiction to news and the news environment that like, I will take with me to my grave.
So when you advanced and then you started to become interested or introduced rather to the design world and all of that space, was there anything about those initial first months or years in that space that was a difficult learning curve?
Yes and no. I would say that after my time at House and Garden, I bounced around in different magazines for a while. Like a brief stint at Oprah's O at Home, which used to be a separate shelter magazine that no longer exists. And then I was freelance writing, and I started then at Surface Magazine, where I was for 7 years. And that for me was also another sort of baptism by fire of it wasn't. You then realize, the world of architecture and design is as I call it, like design with a capital D, is very different from a shelter magazine and home and the idea of home and sort of lifestyle service. And Surface was a very, high-minded design magazine during the heyday of Starchitects and star industrial designers. And it was the first time I went to Milan Design Week, the first time I went to Maison et Objet, which is a trade show in Paris. That was a real introduction of like, what is modernism? What is postmodernism? What are the differences? Who are all these major people? Like, serious architecture and design only found its way into the pages of House and Garden very rarely. And back then, when I was at Surface, those two worlds were very separate. Now it's very mixed together. We're in a period of design where residential and contract have kind of blurred so much that designers don't really distinguish too much between them. That sort of Venn diagram, that sort of like overlap is much greater now than it used to be. But this was, a different time.
So I'm sure for folks listening who don't have the ability to visualize those differences, what were the differences between those two circles in the Venn diagram?
It was a difference between, an urban planner or someone who designs offices versus someone who is a decorator, right? And there wasn't as much crossover as there is today. That really has changed. These just sort of the newness of things, the idea of talking about sustainability was a new idea that was, radical for its time. Certain websites were not up and running at the time. This is like pre-Dezeen, early days of Core 77 and stuff like that. So, you could do a 3-page story about how someone designed like a very cool bicycle and meet the designer and really talk to them. And they were like 2 pages away from a story about an architect in China doing some new city or something. So that was just different. The way that news and information in the design world traveled was very different. I'm sorry, someone's buzzing my front door. I'm gonna go grab one.
Lunch delivery.
I'm in a small building, so people just buzz my door whenever.
Yeah, of course.
When they just want to get in. I think people who are maybe newer to design, there was a time when offices were designed to look like offices. They looked like Severance, right? Like, it was cubicles and it was contract design, and that had nothing to do with home, right? Like, outdoor furniture looked like outdoor furniture. Indoor furniture looked like indoor furniture. Offices looked like offices. Restaurants looked like restaurants. There was not this big mix, right? The design gallery scene was in its infancy and really was called design art. So it was really like, it was just a different world. Like, you would talk to big stories, you do big stories about, Herman Miller and their new office system, or a new task chair by Yves Bahar, was like a big deal. That was what was news back then. Now, a lot of that sort of industrial design, contract design is really kind of faded a lot. And, product design is very different now. Like it wasn't as modular and customizable as it used to be. It was like, here's the chair, it comes in 3 colors and that's it. Like, and we've worked for 3 years with the world's master architect to make this chair. Like there wasn't this whole, oh, it's whatever you want, it's modular. It's like none of that really. That was looked down upon in the world of design as sort of just like decorating, right? So
interesting.
That world has changed considerably. Not always for the better, but this idea when offices needed to start looking like a home, because people were working long hours, and people were working from home, so they wanted their home spaces to be more utilitarian. That's all new. That's a new development that has shifted the landscape. People don't want to work in cubicles anymore. I mean, they still exist, of course, but like that's not news. Like no one's investing a lot of money into, offices that look like Severance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although things tend to come in waves, or they go back and forth, so maybe someone will do it, and it'll be a big deal.
I hope so. Listen, without the actual act of severance,
right.
without brain surgery, as I'm a huge fan of the show, and actually I read a story where someone was like talking about the aesthetics of like how we really miss that. Like we miss this sort of this division between home and work. But I would say the world is very different in terms of like what was culturally important, and this is all, I started it when I started at Surface. Yeah, this is before the iPhone, before, it was before the iPhone, it was definitely before social media. So, and I remember early on someone said, hey, there's an editor who used to work at this magazine called Icon, and he's just taking all the press kits that we get and just putting them on his little website, just without any sort of gag reflex. He's just putting all of the images on a site with the press release every day, and he's just posting them on his little blog called Dezeen. And we were like, oh, that's weird. Okay, how do we work on a print magazine this way? We're using the same images and the same interviews and the same people. It was the infancy of that. And I was there for 7 years. I was the editor-in-chief for half of that. And that was that was like the part 2 or the second act in my story, I guess, in design.
You were talking about the differences and describing them by their project type and the scale, residence and decorating elements versus offices and office structures and that kind of that. But did you also find that there were differences in the type of discourse in those two spaces? So not just like a typological difference, but the discourse taking place in one versus the other was also different.
Yeah, totally. I would say, and maybe it's the impact of social media and digital culture, but we didn't. Back in the day at Surface, like, was very different from a Shelter magazine. So a Shelter magazine, we would do our Tastemaker issue at House and Garden, and I forget what we exactly what it was called. I still have all the issues that in my here with me. It was portraits of all these, craftsmen and business leaders and decorators and gallerists and all sorts of things. And it was all about the sort of the romance and the lifestyle and the people and the beauty and everything. But at Surface, it was really about the object. Very few portraits at the end of the day it wasn't just the focus on that. Like, people didn't care what an architect looked like. Mm-hmm. They cared what they wanted to see the project because that was their only way of seeing it. So, there was no that was the way. It was to buy a magazine and to look at a printed picture. There was nothing. There was no other outlet. So because the focus was more on the work, not on the people, that's been a major shift, probably for the worse. And I think that just accelerated through other magazines as the art world and the design world and the fashion world just started to collide, where, a lot of that, the coverage collided too, and the economics of journalism changed. And so a lot of stuff is just blurred in a way. And I think what I'm doing now is actually like the ultimate blurring of that. But,
But so
I'm rolling with the punches on that one.
the shift from focusing on the products, the objects, the designs themselves, to focusing on the personalities of the people, or their outward personalities. Why would that be considered a for the worse?
Because we're not talking about design as much. We're talking about personality and popularity and connectiveness and buzz and there is a sort of currency to the portrait and to the profile. No one needs a lot of projects aren't getting documented like they used to. They're just out there in the digital ether, which has in turn weirdly made design books and monographs all the more important, which they were kind of on their way out for a while, and now they are super key and central, just because there isn't a lot of outlets for people otherwise. That's just sort of like a general shift as everything is kind of blurred. It's the personality economy, right? So I'm the grand tourist, and Kelly Wearstler is big on Instagram. I wrote Kelly's last book, and it's this sort of like personality driven economy. This runs through everything, right? This runs through design, journalism, art, politics. So I don't need to I don't need to explain what I mean by that. Like, it's personality driven. It's not policy driven. It's not ideas driven. And in a sense, this is all kind of, it's just not the discourse is not as focused on the work. It's as focused on the people. And so that can be a detriment, I think, ultimately.
It's a really interesting point, and it's one that I can certainly understand and agree with. I think specifically in the architecture community and profession, I remember when there was a Starchitect, let's say, era, and you had the 3 or 4 or 5 people who were Starchitects, and everyone talked about them, and it felt like it was kind of very quickly the architecture community sort of turned against those folks internally. Whether or not we were saying that out loud to everyone else, I don't know. And saying like we're beyond this, because I think as a community, we're just, to your point exactly, we're tired of this game, because it had nothing to do with like the content itself, in our case the architecture itself, or it wasn't being discussed and understood. It was just an architect dressed in black doing a cool photograph in front of their building. You're like, okay, that has nothing to do with whether or not it's good, and so I think inside of the community for a long time, even still now, a lot of folks were either justifiably so or not, for example, not happy with Frank Gehry. They're just tired of that.
Right.
And again, he became so famous and is so famous that everything becomes distorted at that point. You can't tell what is valid and not valid in terms of criticism. But there was definitely that feeling amongst the architects, like, can we focus more on, in our space, less on really flashy, extremely expensive, egregiously expensive buildings, and talk more about just really good, still, innovative design, but not by someone who is clearly the face is as important as the building.
Yeah, I would say for people that are trying to that are grappling with this now, and I still get this question a lot, especially from architects over a certain age. There is an economy to our information structure, or however you are to our news culture. Is a magazine can no longer. So let's say there's a new museum in Lisbon, right? Like, we're all talking about it. And it's this everyone's heard about this amazing building by a brand new architect. and it's the best in the world. So as a magazine editor, they're going to be like, okay, I can't afford to send somebody to this museum to write a serious review. I only have 2 pages in the magazine, not 8, like my predecessor did. But what I can afford to do, and all the pictures of this building are everywhere online socially. How do I do my story? So what's going to happen is, well, I only need a few pictures, right? So, and I need the hero shots. Well, the photographer hired by the architect, let's say it's Ewan Bond, like they already have that information. They already have those pictures. I don't need those pictures per se. But what I need to do to make sure that my story is unique compared to everything online and on social is I'm going to take a portrait of the architect in the building, and I'm going to interview him about it. And that then becomes this human-centric, personality-centric story, which, maybe 20 years ago, it would have been much more important to have that 10-page feature in Architectural Record without a human face anywhere, like just, real documented work, and that was the only way to see it. And there was, that story had to come out first for the industry before everyone else got their hands on it. And so this sort of diminishing of an evolution of the media landscape lends itself towards a personality-driven, and social media, of course, into this sort of lack of like, why are we focusing on Frank Gehry, or why are we focusing on celebrity? Right? Not talking about like Brad Pitt celebrity. I'm talking about Frank Gehry levels, and not personal experience, and like that's just been across the board.
Interesting.
Why this is happening? It's all happening for a reason.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I don't think that focusing on the people is a bad thing. I'll be very clear about that.
It needs to be a balance.
But it's just that I think sometimes that allows for, again, the people being interviewed to create a persona that is sometimes authentic and sometimes very inauthentic, and they're saying stuff they know is going to sound and read good. But anyone is like in the industry who knows a person who knows that person, they know for real. But that's a bunch of fluff. Like that's not true. That's not what's happening inside of their thinking. That's not what's happening inside their office. They're saying it because it's a good story,
right? But
it's not reality.
Or it's honestly, it's coming from a press release and no one's doing the interview.
Yeah.
And that's why when I get an interview via email for my newsletter, let's say, I can if I feel like it was written by a publicist for them, I won't run it. Like I have to make sure, and that's why I don't. I always share questions from my podcast with a listener, with a guest before, but the best answers I get are from the tangential questions that I ask on the fly, because they're kind of like giving me an honest moment. And so when I think about interviews, the interviews that really fascinate me are sometimes older interviews with Larry King, because he would just take someone who is super famous in a room with bright lights live. It was called Larry King Live, and it was live. Yeah. And this person, maybe it's a celebrity or something, who normally has 5 publicists, a stylist, a manager, a lawyer, a record label, like all of these levels of filter, and then just say like, so like Lady Gaga, like, like why do you call them little monsters? Like whatever, like really like, what is good music anyway? Like, and just these basic questions that were never longer than 10 words. Would just stump people. They just wouldn't, because they have to really respond honestly and authentically. And sometimes in the world of style, it's sometimes difficult to get to certain people in worlds of design and art and style and whatever, where they're the people around them, not the guests themselves. Sometimes it's the machine around them really doesn't want them to be on the record live on an interview that they can't control. Yeah. And so that's, but that's also kind of think what makes podcasts so, desirable now is that it's just not polished necessarily. It's not cleansed, right? If you say something, you say something. Like, like it's not about editing, right? So, and cleaning and anything like that. So.
And now a little break for our show sponsors.
Revit users, you have access to a powerful new capability you might not know about. Available with Revit version 2023.1 onward, Autodesk Insight is a next-generation carbon analysis tool that can help you make the leap toward low-carbon design. With only a few clicks, Insight lets you analyze, understand, and track the embodied and operational carbon impact of your design choices. You can then visualize opportunities for energy efficiency and carbon mitigation with its flexible dashboards, helping you make more sustainable and informed decisions. Check out the Insight link in our show notes to learn more. This episode of The Second Studio is brought to you by BQE Core, the all-in-one firm management software built for architects. Designed by architects for architects, Core helps you track time effortlessly, manage projects seamlessly, and get paid faster, so you can focus on design, not spreadsheets. With powerful automation and real-time insights, it's everything you need to run a smarter and more profitable firm. See how BQE Core can transform your practice by clicking the link in our show notes.
Have you noticed any new trends? Like we just talked about, kind of like the more personality-driven type of interview and publications. Did you notice like new trends coming, out lately that might be reverting back to something that's more about, let's say, the work rather than the person?
Or a different thing.
Or something even different than that?
No. I was thinking about that, and I really don't. I really, I think you can't go home again. And I don't think we're going to go back to the way things were unless we have some sort of weird, like, Luddite revolution where we throw our computers out the window and outlaw digital culture and have to go back to magazines and newspapers, which personally I'm rooting for. But I don't think it's going to happen. And you never say never the way things are going now. But yeah, I think it will evolve into something completely new. And in terms of like the trends of how things are going, people are now craving print and they're craving something real. And I think we're all getting tired of this sort of the tyranny of the algorithm dictating what we see. Even I think the statistic of like when you open Instagram, like what you see versus what you follow.
Yeah.
Like 57% of what you see are from people you don't follow. And so it's like, wait a minute, like what's the point of following people if the algorithm is going to make all the decisions for me? And so print remains, the one place where you can commission work. People have over the years have tried to create websites where they do commission shoots and photography and original interviews and stuff like that. And that works in politics and it works in hard news. It just doesn't in art and design and fashion and lifestyle and architecture. We need something permanent. There's a reason why the Rizzoli monograph is more popular than ever. There's a reason why the sexy Phaidon book is so cool and so desirable, because it's real and because people work on them for years and there's a quality to everything about it. There's no, that without the ability to commission new work, people like me aren't needed, because at the end of the day, people will just be able to plug in press releases into an AI algorithm and have these like 300-word stories written perfectly with pickup art, right? So we have to compete against all of that. And so for me, what I'm doing is I'm trying to run in the opposite direction as fast as I can. It's easier for me to do that and more successful and more fruitful and more fulfilling than trying to compete with the deluge of, digital information, which is increasingly unprofitable also.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. And I think you're right. There has been in the last, I don't know how many years, this feeling that I've had, and I don't have like data to support this, of people craving for something that is, I think you put it as being more real and also higher quality. Like people are just wanting that. I mean, it's funny I say this because of course we have a podcast. We're like, what the hell are we doing? But we didn't, when we started this thing, we didn't know where we were going to go. But it's, one of the big shifts also is just the diversification of how information is put out there, and everyone can have we have a podcast, everyone can have a podcast, and the number of podcasts specifically as one space of the media has increased by, I don't know how many fold in the last 5 years, last 3 years, and there's in theory some benefit to that diversification and that openness, but it's just it also creates a lot of, I don't know, confusion and sometimes very, very sloppy content.
Yeah.
Speaking about our own show sometimes too.
Listen,
exactly.
podcasts are not social media. They were invented by Apple, I think 15 years ago, right? The only requirement for a podcast is that I think it has to be 60 seconds and it's an MP3. Like that's it really. Yeah. And because of that, it's really hard to promote. It's hard to, you can't really like and share and all that stuff very easily. It's a different platform. Platforms like YouTube and Instagram, they don't want to, they're not built to refer you to a different platform. That's sort of death for them. So even though the barrier to entry on podcasts has never been lower because the technology is so good. Even the system that we're using today didn't exist a few years ago. It didn't exist really when I started The Grand Tourist in 2021. All the technology has made it so super simple, but at the end of the day, the quality of sitting down with a guest for an hour and really listening and hearing someone's story is sort of infinitely more impactful than seeing something on Instagram for half of a second. And by the time you've put down the phone, you've completely forgotten about it. Like I couldn't, and there's no, you can save certain posts, but let's be honest, like half of that time you're in a sort of comatose serotonin driven state or dopamine state of like flipping through things and liking things like Pavlov's dogs, like we're all just kind of wired to kind of consume and click and tap. So, that's a big part of it.
Do you find, a few moments ago you were talking about the interviews and some of the challenges of interviews. Do you find that doing long format conversations is, I don't know what the word is. It's like a relief to the rest of the day, that it, for you personally, provides you something that makes you feel good?
I get nervous about every interview. I try to do as much preparation as possible. I try to just listen. The Grand Tourist is not about me, so it's not as much of a chat show. We don't use video. Everything is. I'm speaking to designers and architects and collectors and editors around the globe. It is really about me. I get 1 hour with this person in my entire life, and this is how I really want to hear their story, and learn something about the world of art and design and culture through that 1 hour. So I still get really nervous about it. I love a day after the interview is done, no matter who it is. Even the most friendly ones, you've got to be on your toes. I'm keeping track of time, keeping track of my questions. Really want to make sure that, everything turns out okay and that the audio is good and all that stuff. Sometimes I have people that with the world's thickest accents in the world of design, and I'm really like, okay, am I asking the right questions to set this up? Are you understanding what I'm saying? Am I understanding what you're saying? Is the listener gonna get any of this? But it's both a wonderful, beautiful thing, and but it's work, and it's something that it's I put a lot of care and attention into each episode, and with who I choose and everything. So it's a great thing. But like any, like a stand-up comedian, like people get nervous before they go out, no matter how experienced they are. Yeah. So I get nervous before every interview. I probably should be more nervous for this interview, but I'm not.
That's good. That's good. I think it sounded like most of your interviews were done remotely. do you any interest in doing them in person
Yes,
again?
I have done some in person, but you actually can't tell that I've done them in person
Oh, really?
unless I say, "Hey, I was in Paris and I did something at this headquarters." Um, it, I think at the end of the day, if you have really clean sound, like it's audio, you can't tell. So you can tell if someone's in New York, and you can hear a siren in the background sometimes, no matter how rich they are.
Yeah.
Those Upper East Side buildings, still you can hear every siren. So yes, I would say yeah, my guests, they don't necessarily want to be in video. They don't want to bother with hair and makeup. They're actually sort of enchanted by the idea of an audio only experience. So I don't put my stuff up on YouTube. Like, I keep it as pure as possible. I thought in the beginning, oh, this would be romantic and I'll travel around the world and interview all these people around the world. But like, when you're doing 35 episodes a year, that's not possible,
It's a
unless
lot.
you have a trust fund. So that's just not possible. And also, again, like it's more comfortable for me to do it from home. That's more technically secure, right? There's so many things that can go wrong.
Right.
When you have gear that's battery powered versus
Yeah. Oh
a
my gosh.
laptop with automatic backups and stuff and all that jazz. So that's definitely a big part of it. But yeah, it's definitely mostly remote. And even though everyone is doing video stuff like that, I tend to run the other way.
Yeah.
That served me well. Served me well so far.
Yeah, it's interesting. We, for the first number of years, were purely audio because I don't know why, it was just the case. And then we started doing video, and I've never really thought about the video component of what we do as being the central thing. It's more like it's there, and some people watch it on YouTube, which is amazing. And I think mostly it just provides like a short visual. Like, for my own experience as a consumer or a listener for shows I used to listen to, I would never watch the podcast, but I'd watch maybe 2 minutes of it, and then I could just imagine those two characters in my head during the rest of the podcast. And I feel like that's the greatest value that the video brings. But it's kind of there is something beautiful about being purely in the audio space as a consumer and as an interviewer that is just it further removes you from like the everyday reality. And I think it's easier to get into this free-flowing open space of thought, if you can. I think you were remarking also that sometimes we found it too, it's sometimes difficult to get guests to step outside of their rehearsed dialogue, right? And that's also why we used to actually record for like 2 hours, more than 2 hours, just to get people past their comfort zone. And there's a few that we did that were like 3 hours long.
That's insane.
Which is kind of crazy. But when you get past the 2 hour mark, like, that's when shit gets weird. And that's when it's really fun and interesting, I think. Like, to your point about the kind of side questions, the side quests you go on that have nothing to do with what they're used to saying to everyone else. So that's what we try to do, but it's sometimes not easy.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I say all of this, but I'm a YouTube addict. Like, I don't watch Netflix. I subscribe to like 30 or 40 different YouTubers. Like, and I'm addicted to. There's so many amazing creators in different spaces, giving me in architecture and design and in art, photography, news. Some are podcasts, like the clips from Conan O'Brien and and all that stuff. Like, I love it. Like, I love all of that. It's just for me personally in my little business, like it's been audio only, and now I'm moving into a new realm with print. And so sometimes I think that all that video stuff. And also, I'm a glutton for punishment. So I know myself. If I did video, I would just go, oh, no. Like, the YouTube has to be, like some National Geographic like style,
Right.
like some sort of PBS period drama of, beautiful with drone shots of a house. And, so much of what I do, The Grand Tourist, is so global and so visual. And so many of my guests just don't want to be on camera. And there's just all these restrictions and stuff like that. So I know I would probably try to make every episode like something like, that Stanley Tucci's show on CNN when he went to Italy. Like it would be something,
Right.
something like that.
Right.
So I don't know. But yeah, so far the allure of audio has just sort of helped me create sort of like a brand, basically.
And you mentioned that you're getting back into print.
Yes. So this May, we are debuting our first ever print issue of the Grand Tourist. And we just got in some early copies from the printer yesterday. This will be for people hopefully hearing this can go find a link somewhere, which I don't know what the link is going to be, probably on my Instagram, and on thegrandtourist.net to purchase a copy. And it is sort of a slightly oversized hardcover book, 364 pages of interviews with people, interviews and photo shoots from truly around the world, from the universe of the Grand Tourist. And it's been an interesting exercise in taking a podcast and translating into print. And I don't know if anyone has done that before necessarily. Definitely not in my circle of media, but everyone in the podcast season that I'm currently in the middle of right now, which ran from February and will run into April, all of those guests are in the magazine with photo shoots, plus 200 plus pages of other content that is original to the magazine, and will also run online. We commissioned everything in the book, all the interviews, of course, but all the photography. And this is sort of,
Goodness.
It's been, it was quite the task, quite the journey. We've had a lot of amazing support from brands, and super thrilled about that. We're going to have a big launch in May, and we're super excited to kind of see what the reaction is, and then make plans for the future. Maybe we'll just do this one. Who knows? You never know when you put something like this out into the world. But it's been interesting because before, audio was my way of putting together unlikely, I would say, like, dinner table guests, right? So I work with this amazing illustrator. His name is Zebedee Helm. He's from the UK, and his illustrations is a way of sort of like flattening out the universe of the Grand Tourist, so that you could have a chef in one moment, and then an architect in the next, and then a radical feminist artist 2 days later, right? But now that we're photographing everything, there's now a visual aesthetic that's arriving through who we choose, how we photograph them, the photographers that we pick. And it's been super fun and fascinating to kind of like go down that journey and see how people react to that. And we'll kind of see how it goes. But I'm very proud of the work that we did, and can't wait to share it with everybody.
How long did it take to to get that to put together?
And saying, like, because it was the first time we had done it, I would say 9 months.
Yeah.
When you're really from like, okay, where from the printing to the choice of paper, where you're printing it, the format, how it all works, because it is technically a book. I mean, it's a hardcover bound book with ads. We had to kind of engineer it and do some tests with dummy copies and stuff like that to make sure that it would like function as it needs to function. And that was, it wasn't. If we did it again, the time would be cut in half. But when you're doing something from scratch, you have to explain to people what it is and talk to people about it, get some support before you really pull the trigger and actually start commissioning work and paying people to do things. So yeah, we have stories from, it is the Grand Tourist. So we have stories from Africa, Korea, Berlin, Paris, Oxford, Los Angeles, New York. I know I'm forgetting something. New Delhi. I always forget New Delhi. It's been an amazing. It's very much the Grand Tourist. So it is Q&A focused with all of these people from around the world, and with the podcast guests, sort of like the spine that sort of runs through the entire book. With all of our fantastic guests this season. So we had David and Sybil Yerman of the brand David Yerman, who are legends in the jewelry business. We've had, Hans Ulrich Obrist, the world's most famous contemporary art curator and head of the Serpentine in London. Elizabeth Diller from Diller Scofidio Renfro. All sorts of amazing people. And so putting all of those people in the same universe with all this other content was sort of like a real treat. And we didn't really know how it would all turn out. But now that we've physically held it in our hands, it was quite the relief to kind of see that it all does make sense. And I work with an amazing creative director. His name is Matthias Ernstberger. We worked together when I took over as the editor-in-chief of Surface. I hired him to do the redesign back then. And we'd stayed in touch this whole time. He recently restarted up his own studio. He was a disciple of Stefan Sagmeister for many years early on in his career, and has worked in fashion and luxury. And so reuniting with him and putting this magazine together was a real treat. So
I would imagine that the big question that might have been looming in the back of your mind as you were going through this process is how well it would feel like it is a coherent, cohesive a thing because of the diversity of guests and the different places and their different professions, that one would assume at the outset that the final book could feel kind of like these are not meant to be together. It feels more like a patchwork than it does a clear, again, cohesive thing, but it sounds like it worked out.
Yeah, I really wanted to make it, feel familiar to the people who listen to the podcast. So, at the masthead, it doesn't say editor-in-chief, it says the Grand Tourist and has my name. Like that's basically, like people ask, how do you choose people? I'm like, the Grand Tourist makes a decision and I just do whatever he says, right? Like that people are like, well, who's your team doing this, that, and the other thing? And I'm just like, well, most of it's me. Like I'm deciding how everything happens. Doing all of that for the first time with this print thing for the first time in years, kind of putting this whole thing together. It really is like, it's not a shelter magazine. It's not a design magazine. It's not a travel magazine. It's the Grand Tourist. And so it's particular, and you don't need to get this magazine to learn about news. You don't need to get it for any other reason as to kind of like have it as a journey on your own grand tour of all of these different personalities that I have hand selected for you. That's the joyful entertainment part of it all. Not necessarily a news magazine or anything like that, or something too specific. So I feel like that everything we do is very much like was being done in the way that we have done it. No one else would really do it the same way. So I sort of feel strongly about that. And I think if we do continue, we do other issues, I want to go down that road even more, and be more unique and more stand out more and do things differently than most other people are doing. And I think just explaining this to people would say like, yes, that's fine. We're not going to support the magazine because you're another design magazine. We don't need another design magazine. What we do need is we need something really unique and original. And when you make it kind of this, again, a sort of extension of the personality economy, that's what you get, because I'm not conforming to anyone's expectations other than my own. And I'm not sort of going to find myself constrained either by certain things and certain expectations. So, we'll see.
Cool. Another question I had was, given all of the different types of people that you've spoken with and interviewed over the years, but a lot of them are creatives of some kind, right? They're making things, creating things, curating things. Are there any big commonalities you see across all these successful individuals, even though they're in different professions?
Yes.
Like, are there certain things that are clearly like they all seem to have this trait or this background story or something that keys into their, success?
Yeah, I would say totally that, especially in art and design and collecting and you would kind of I think some people would expect really successful people in these fields to be the same type of success that someone might have if they were in the medical field. Like, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. I went to the best schools. I got my postdoctorate here, and then I worked at this amazing hospital, and then I kept doing and I kept doing, and then I did this thing and I discovered something that no one ever discovered. Like, very kind of one track, very intentional, very dedicated. Most of the people that I've interviewed share, no matter what they do, whether they're a chef or an architect or an interior designer, they are all remarkably similar in their personality and in their outlook on life. I would say, the people that I choose, if they were in a dinner together, they would all get along, right? They would really have something in common and an approach to life. It's funny when you talk to people who are very successful, meaning they're very senior in whatever they do. For so many of them, you actually ask them, like, so how did you get started? They're all kind of like, well, I studied photography. Like Liz Diller, she studied photography before she somehow found her way into architecture. And it now shows in her career and the portfolio that her firm has. That they approach it in a creative way, not in a design engineering way necessarily. There are chefs who are like, yeah, for a year I went and I was a young chef and I was trained in France, and then I decided to live in Bangkok for 2 years for a hotel there, and I got introduced to all the stuff that I never, I could have just stayed in Paris and worked for all the fancy places, but I decided to take a leap and go someplace else. Or an artist who was like, I was a monk in India for 2 years before I came back, and I came back a changed person, and I approached my art in a different way. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of people kind of like, a lot of them weren't so focused on success. They were just focused on the experience and on doing something new and taking chances and taking risks. And when I was at Surface back in the day, we would talk about the emergence of the transdisciplinary designer, meaning they weren't multidisciplinary. Like, they weren't an architect who also takes pictures of fashion or whatever. That's multidisciplinary. But when you're transdisciplinary, like, your photography hobby or your photography part of your studio is used directly as a part of your creative process in architecture. And that's just as a random example. And I think the people who are the most transdisciplinary and the most unique in the way that they think and the way that they approach their life and their clients and their opportunities are the ones that are the successful ones that really make it to be of interest by the time they hit 70, let's say. And that's a big part of, I think, what makes someone an amazing designer or an artist or some sort of creative.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. And as you were speaking, I was trying to ask myself that same question. And I think you're right. I mean, for us, some of our most interesting guests, or rather the people who do the most interesting work, they have some other angle to their background that would not make sense if you're plotting out the life of the doctor, like you were stating. Is there something else that is completely random or somewhat related, but again, not part of the predictable track that comes in, and then they kind of blend things and make it their own?
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because we noticed by interviewing all the guests we've had on is that a lot of them, it kind of like life comes back full circle in some ways. Like, they mentioned something at the beginning of the interview where maybe during their childhood they were interested in those things or they were questioning those things. They went away from that for a little while, and eventually life brought them back to it. And that's at that point that basically their career skyrocketed. It's because they basically found themselves again in some ways, which is always very interesting.
Yeah, I would say if you're a young architect and you're kind of not sure what you want to do, you still want to be an architect, or and you work for some firm, and there's an opportunity for you to join the Peace Corps and do stuff in Africa for a year, let's say, or whatever. Like, that's not necessarily going to kill your architecture career. It could be the exact thing that your architecture career needs, is outside stimulus, right? Something to happen in your life that makes you see the world in a different way, appreciate things differently, think about things differently. I think that's key no matter who you are or what you do. I mean, everybody, so many people I talk to have projects where someone was like, oh, that's crazy, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like that's super key. I would say, you have to grow as a person. And that's why when I think about like, how would I, as an educator, kind of put together a curriculum for like future editors, like I wouldn't necessarily focus too much on some traditional things. I would focus more on, politics and photography, and really to be as well-rounded as humanly possible, to not focus too much on technical things, but just to be as well-rounded as humanly possible, with maybe a through line of writing, like that's
Right.
and documenting. That's kind of, I think, the most important thing. But like, especially for artists and designers, like a really great art designer needs to really know and appreciate art and design really, really well. Like they can't just learn about design and like where to put a sofa and a wall. Like it's so not that. Like, and it's just so not that. And when I judge student competitions, I used to do a lot, like, there is a kind of maturity and worldview and sources of inspiration that is just so important, like for someone to be a good designer. Like it's just not always about technical acuity and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we had I'm totally blanking on his name, which is horrible. I want to say Paul Rudolph, but that's an architect. Paul Goldberger on the show, and he made this interesting remark that he felt that for someone to study and learn architecture, that they shouldn't do that until they are the age, I forget what he said, the age of 22 or 25. Like the idea that you would go and study architecture at the age of 17 or 18 for 5 years and pursue it that way didn't make sense to him. Sort of related, I think, to what we're talking about, that you need to have, experiences to inform what you're doing. And I would say, for the record, I understand in principle that. I think that principle applies in a lot of ways, but I don't agree with architecture in that timeline, because most often what I've seen is the opposite, where when someone gets too old, they become too fixed in their way of thinking and their preconceptions about architecture or design or whatever it is. And then when they go to school at a later age, they are not as open as they should be, provided that the school they're attending is meant to, is trying to broaden their horizons. It's tough. I've also wondered if, so I think your description of what happens in the academic space, it makes total sense. I've also wondered, I guess, in terms of timelines after a person graduates, or more in the out in the world space, if the freedom to explore other things, investigate other things, be travel and see other things is lessening because of the financial constraints. So for myself, I'm thinking like a lot of our guests who are older than us, they talked about these times where they spent years or whatever it was doing all this stuff. And for a lot of my colleagues now, and certainly ones younger than me, they don't have the ability to do that. No one has the money to do those things. The Peace Corps is actually a really good example, because that's one way you could do it. Yeah. But you don't have the money to do whatever our older guests did, or they don't feel like they have the freedom to, because they have to start working to make money, because they know it's not going to be for another 15 years before they pay off student debt. So there's this kind of, and I'm not saying that's an excuse for sure, but there's this kind of feeling by a lot of the younger generations that I've just got to try and be successful in order and to make money, so I'm not living rent month to month. And if I can do that, that's a win. And I think, unfortunately, with that mentality, that freedom to step outside of your bubble sometimes gets sacrificed.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I would not be who I am today without my internships. Like, I didn't go to grad school. My degree was in business administration. Everything I know about the world I come comes through my internships and my jobs. And because I went to a state school and I didn't go to a graduate school, I didn't have any debt, thankfully, right? And my state school was a New York State school, so it was affordable. And even if I did take out a loan, it would have been a very small one. And so I'm fortunate that like I was able to do that and not come out of school without any debt. And I just was a workaholic and I started working right away. But all of my internships were completely unpaid, but I had that luxury because I lived nearby, so I could just go home to my parents' house. And, you know, you hear back in the day about these interns and stuff like that were like totally abused, like, and they would be working for nothing for years full time. And then people would say, well, you have to be so privileged in order to afford that. Yeah, like that's total abuse, and no one should have an internship. Like an intern like that. An internship should be from my point of view, it should be totally unpaid for school credit for a maximum of like 3 to 4 months part-time. Like it is.
That is the definition of an internship, though.
But
it just becomes skewed.
Now it's not. Now,
Yeah.
you and I pay my intern. So now the expectation is that you have to pay, and you know, some people are just treating it as just sort of like a low-level job rather than you're here to learn in exchange for credit and all of that stuff. But in certain careers, like I just know, I just had a conversation with a peer of mine who was like, yeah, I had an intern and I just let them go because I could just do it myself. And I spent more time. I just didn't have the budget, and it didn't make sense. You know, there is a certain level of grunt work required that you're learning things like my experience at the Sally Show, like that was unpaid drudgery, you know, ushering people from an audience to go to the bathroom and like bring them to the bathroom, make sure they don't wander off in the studio and like come back. Like that's, you know, that's work, that's life experience. Right. But that was, you know, but of course, if you're in some school where, you know, you know, let's say you're not in a big city where there's internships, or you don't have that, you know, it's a very different thing. So like, obviously I understand both sides of it, but I don't think making sure that every internship is paid is necessarily a good thing. It's better to have an internship like 2 full days a week for 3 months unpaid than like a paid thing for half a year where you're not learning as much. And you know, listen, all of this is fueled by the skyrocketing costs of living and education, which I think is just horrific and a major problem in our lives that has all these other unintended consequences. This sort of like internship, creative journey, all that stuff is definitely, I mean, you know, people there now, you can get a master's degree in design criticism. There was no such thing when I was in school. That was not an option. No one did that. Like no one in magazines very few people had a journalism degree. Like some people, half the people did, but maybe most of the people in magazines and art and all that stuff, no one had that. No one would even, why would you think about that? Like, who would pay for that? Like, right. I'm making $30,000 a year being a design journalist. Why would I pay $60,000 to learn how to do something I'm already doing?
Right.
So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, we're kind of then, you know, now we're talking about why is college $60,000 a year, you know, and that kind of thing, which I don't understand.
Yeah, it's also, but kind of to your point, it's become the accepted standard way of that's what you do. You go to school and you spend a bunch of money on school, and that's what it is. I had another question, which is, do you have any so in April and May, you have the book coming out, or in May, I think you said, but any future goals and visions for the Grand Tourist?
No, and it's funny because I was just having a breakfast with a friend in the industry. We were talking about how things have changed, and I just at some point we were talking about, like, you know, what will be the impact of a potential trade war on architecture and design and media and what happens if the economy really tanks, or what about this, or what about that? And, did you hear about this magazine laying off people, or what have you? My entire career, my entire generation, I'm in my late 40s, there's been nothing but uncertainty. Like, we dealt with the dot-com 1.0 boom and the crash. We dealt with the boom of the mid-aughts and then the Great Recession. Then we dealt with the rise of social media, and then a second boom, and then a global pandemic. And then during the pandemic, we went through a cultural shift with Me Too, Black Lives Matter, everything. Then now we're dealing with a totally new era, and a totally new set of economic rules and regulations and things like that. So I'm sort of tired of making long-term plans and trying to be like, what's the future of magazines? Like, I would have told you 5 years ago, like, no one in their right mind would do a print magazine. And here I am doing a print issue of the Grand Tourist, and it's been wonderful, and we got a lot of support from it. So, everything comes full circle, and we'll just see how things evolve. So when I started the Grand Tourist, I was sort of like thinking out loud to a dear friend of mine and saying, like, should I do a newsletter? Should I do a Substack? Should I do a podcast? Should I do this? Should I do that? And I was really fretting and trying to think about how I was going to do all these different things and how I was going to make money and become a business and attract investors and things like that. And she just stopped me and she was like, it's not about the medium anymore. It's about the message. So I think the era of worrying about, is it about social media? Is it about TikTok? Is it about this? Is it about that? What's new? What's hot? What's gone? What's whatever? Doesn't matter anymore. And it's the message. It's not the medium. And I think that's the future, is thinking about that and not being,
I like that.
Not being closed-minded in terms of how you think about that, because you will go insane trying to predict the future. Who knows what'll happen in the next 4 years? Maybe, and
that's going to shift also anyway. So it's just stay true to the message.
Who knows? It's like, well, maybe electric cars will be out and horseback riding will be back in. So, like,
this point,
everything's possible.
Everything's possible. We have to be open to anything.
Yeah, exactly. Last question for me is, if our listeners want to tune into your podcast, do you have a favorite episode they should start with?
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, wow. I will say everything I do with the Grand Tourist is not what you're supposed to do with the podcast. Meaning we have episodes for all different types of listeners and different types of people who are really dedicated to a certain topic. So...
oh, dude, sorry to interrupt. I feel the same exact way. I think actually you were on a more extreme example than us. I mean, in our case, most of the conversation stays within the architecture construction space, but sometimes the episodes are with folks like yourself and their interviews. Sometimes they're more like for the average person, or let's say clients, or they're for students. And those are like completely different people. And so I'm very certain, I actually say exactly what you said to people very often. Like, if you're going to do a podcast, don't do what we're doing. Like, you're supposed to choose a very specific niche and just stay in that and be under 30 minutes and all this kind of stuff. Wow. Yeah. If you're saying that about your podcast, then then you're doing something wrong. But still wrong that it's right? Yeah. Like, if you love architecture, you might want to listen to an episode I did with Bjarke Ingels or Bob Stern or David Chipperfield. If you love design and sort of collecting, you might want to listen to Pierre Jovanovic or Kelly Wursler or someone like that. If you love food, it might be an episode I did with Thomas Keller or Danielle Ballud, or my very, 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 very first episode with Francis Mallman. Or if you just love journalism and media, you might want to listen to the episode with Tyler Brûlé or Carla Martinez de Salas, who is the editor-in-chief of Vogue Mexico. You might want to listen to, we've done lots of different things. Or if you just want to escape, I did an episode on Vienna
interviewing different people from Vienna, from all different walks of art and design and travel. Or if you love just, if you're thinking about leaving the country, as I think some of us are, you can, I did an episode on buying real estate in Italy. I did an episode on how to buy a chateau, which I thought was something that really doesn't apply to everybody, but it is fascinating you do learn a lot about home and architecture and French culture that way. So yeah, there are a lot of episodes out there. I think at this point I've done 130 episodes, give or take. By the time it airs, it'll be more than 130 over 12 seasons. So, and I do 3 seasons a year. So there is a lot to go through. And a lot of people, I have 2 different kinds of listeners, the ones that just listen to each one and ones that learn about it and then scroll through it and cherry pick the names that they like, that they want to listen to. And sometimes the ones that are the most listened to are ones where people were just curious about what someone sounds like, or they like their work, but they just don't know anything about the person. And so they get to connect. Some of those episodes, they always surprise me. I did a travel episode to Antarctica once, on a cruise ship with Viking, which was this amazing 2-week experience. I did most of the interviews on the ship, with scientists and ambassadors and explorers, and I interviewed the designer of the ship from an amazing architecture and interiors firm that also does big cruise ships and things like that. And that was an amazing episode. I tried to record the sound of sound from Antarctica, only to realize A, Antarctica is known for its silence, and B, there's so much wind that I didn't have a windsock for my audio thing. So I was only able to capture some sounds of penguins, like essentially echolocating and cooing sounds. But that is literally the only thing you'll ever hear in Antarctica. It's so silent you can hear your own blood flow through your eardrums. Like it's that silent. So it's truly like, you may just want to find the most recent episode. Or if you're really into the life and mind of an artist, I did essentially an audiobook with the feminist icon artist Judy Chicago, where she reads from her own book called Revelations, which is sort of her kind of made up feminist Bible, like a sort of a new feminist testament, and with commentary in between, where she's reading from certain chapters, and then we go into sort of a Q&A about each chapter. Or you may just love in the time that we're recording this, a really sort of straightforward interview with the designers, Olivier and Marty from Studio KO in Paris, who did the YSL Museum in Marrakesh, the Chiltern Firehouse in London, which sadly just burned down. And so there's something for everybody, truly.
That's a lot.
Okay, sounds good. Dan, thanks so much for making the time on a Friday midday for you. That's like lunchtime your time.
Yeah.
This is a lot of fun. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you want to support the show, then you can do that by leaving a review of the show in the Apple Podcast app. You can also find us on Spotify and YouTube. What else we have going on? You can find us on Instagram. Our handle is Second Studio Pod, and our website is also secondstudiopod.com. We have a hotline that you can text and email if you have questions, guest suggestions, or things you want us to talk about, and that number is 213-222-6950, and we have an email which is hello@secondstudiopod.com. Thanks everybody for listening. More fun stuff to come. Stay tuned. Bye.